competition series will continue next year, and there is lots of good stuff in store for you. During the course of this series, John has brought Wendy Kopp, Randy Weingarten, Dave Levin, and Eva Moskowitz all to our stage, and tonight, Joel Klein. Clearly, there is no one truth on how to best educate our children, no one-size-fits-all approach, but the thread that ties through each of these conversations is how deeply we as a community care about this issue and our need to be in dialogue with people in positions of influence to affect the resources being dedicated and the ways in which this work is being prioritized. John Merrow began his career as an education reporter with National Public Radio in 1974 with a weekly series, Options in Education. Following the acclaim of that series, John branched out into public television, first as the host of the documentary series, The Merrow Report. John's work has been distinguished by the industry's most prestigious awards, and he is the author of several books and maintains a weekly blog. He's a busy guy. The blog is called Taking Note. His most recent book, which I read and very much enjoyed, The Influence of Teachers, is on sale tonight, and I certainly hope you'll consider picking up a copy and have John sign it at the reception following our talk. Tonight, John will be in conversation with former Chancellor of New York City Department of Education, Joel Klein. The role of the Chancellor involves overseeing a system of over 1,600 schools with 1.1 million students, 136,000 employees, and a $22 billion budget. Also a pretty busy guy. Mr. Klein is now the CEO of the Educational Division and Executive Vice President, Office of the Chairman at News Corporation, where he also serves on the Board of Directors. And we thank Mr. Klein for being with us tonight. Tonight's dialogue presents a meaningful opportunity to explore some of the challenges with our education system, to hear perspectives both on stage and off. We know this is a topic of profound significance, and we welcome the diversity of views and believe we are all strengthened through respectful dialogue. The JCC is very proud to provide a forum for the issues that matter most in our lives. We like to see ourselves as the community's living room for these kinds of conversations. After this interview, John will open to the audience for Q&A, and we invite you to ask questions of our guests. Then the stage will magically transform, and we'll invite you to join us down here for a reception with our guests. But first, please take a moment, silence your cell phones, and join me in welcoming our guests, John Merrow and Joel Klein. Thank you.
Now, I'm guessing this microphone is on. That's correct? Oh, good. And I would like you to lower those lights a little bit, please, so we can see you all. Can you do that for us? Can we lower the lights? Well, just lower these a little bit. All right, well, I am not going to spend a lot of time introducing Joel Klein. You're New Yorkers. You know Joel Klein. You know about his remarkable accomplishments that go way back, by the way. But I want to say last year, 11 months ago in June, the New York Daily News said that Joel Klein was America's most influential educator, even though he was no longer chancellor. The article cited his protégés, former Washington, D.C. Chancellor Michelle Rhee, Louisiana State Superintendent John White, New Jersey Assistant Commissioner Chris Cerf, and the following school superintendents: Jean-Claude Brizard in Chicago, Cammie Anderson in Newark, Andres Alonso in Baltimore, Marcia Lyles in Christina, Delaware, Joshua Starr in Montgomery County, Maryland, Brian Osborne in South Orange, New Jersey, Garth Harries in New Haven, Connecticut. Did the writer leave anyone out? Got them all. That's literally millions and millions of students under the sway of men and women who cut their teeth in Joel's chancellorship, often working directly with him. Now, many people who read that article inferred that the writer must therefore be a fanboy, be a big fan of Joel Klein. Actually, Joel knows differently because he read a book by the guy who wrote the article. It happens to be this book, which is in part quite critical of Joel Klein. And it's a measure of the man that he actually hosted a book party for me when my book came out. But I wrote that article, and I stand by what I said, that Joel is in fact the most influential educator in America. And it's a real privilege, Joel. Thank you very much for doing this.
Thank you.
Let's get the Rupert Murdoch stuff out of the way.
Let's say we've been there and done it. Okay, so let's go on to education.
Well, just this, do you have any regrets? I mean, with all the stuff that's going on, you've just come back from London, there's a report coming out saying he's unfit. Do you have any regrets about having done
No, because what we're doing in education, which is why I went there, is so exciting. And I really, when people start to see the things we're doing, the quality of these technological advances and the power to influence kids. You know, when I worked in the New York City schools for 8 years, I became increasingly convinced that if we don't innovate, do things differently, we live in the most innovative time in the history of humankind, and education is stuck in the 19th century. So that's what I'm working on and doing. I'm going to, take care of the other issues that I'm responsible for, but that's certainly the heart of my excitement there.
You have been described, though, as falling into the role of his consigliere.
Well, I'm certainly there trying to help deal with the situation. I think we are putting it behind us. It's a complex situation. I think if people study it, you'll see the company has been more cooperative, according to the British authorities, than anyone could imagine. And we have really done independent investigations to get to the bottom of everything. And, I was asked to help out and do that, and I did it.
Okay, now we've been there and done
All
that.
right.
So let's talk about you. You grew up poor in Queens. How poor? Tell me about that.
This is not going to. I mean, I hate these outpouring discussions. There's a lot of poor people in this world. We were, my father was a postman. We lived in public housing. By most people's lights, we were certainly working class, poor. In a sense, we had no car. I never had a car. Nobody in my family ever went in an airplane until I got a job at Trans World Airlines in college and got them free passes. So I guess, but on the other hand, I didn't grow up feeling that there wouldn't be food on the plate or that we wouldn't be able to, have ends meet. What was much more powerful to me, John, in the way I grew up was the frustration my father felt. See, he had to quit school during the Great Depression. And when he got out of the Second World War, where he obviously had a profound influence on his life, he wanted to make sure that when he had a family, nobody dropped out of school. And so he took a job in a post office, and because there you had basically civil service protections. Mm-hmm. And he did this job like every day and hated it. And it just broke my heart. I've been pretty successful at trying to persuade people to things, but nothing I could do could persuade my father that he ought to do something else with his life. And so if you want to know, my greatest failure was my inability to convince my father that his kids would get through college and be okay and have real lives, and that he didn't have to put job security ahead of every other value.
As a kid, you were saying that to your father?
Yeah. I mean, not when I was 4. But, as a
now,
kid.
There's a reference in Who's Who to your stepfather.
No.
Is that a mistake?
At least nothing that I know about, but I don't have the best memory, so but not that I know about.
You may want to check Who's Who, because Lorenzi, yeah. So that's just so was that what motivated you? I mean, you're a high achiever. You went to William Cullen Bryant High. I walked around his high school with him when he took the job as chancellor, and there's we found a couple of plaques on the wall, an honor roll with your name on it. But what's the driver? Was it?
So I think it's a good question. It probably explains who I am. First of all, let me just say we were doing this interview there, and John's dad was ill, and he had to leave, and just the emotion of that experience really created a bond between us. It's very powerful and probably leads him to ask the kind of question you're asking. But see, I guess I grew up in a pretty unhappy household, and why I feel so passionately about education is teachers in Astoria, one more than others, but many of them really transformed my life. A guy named Sidney Harris.
He was your physics teacher.
My physics teacher. And I guess nobody sort of in that school said to me, well, you grew up in public housing, your parents don't read, you've never been to a museum, so we shouldn't expect too much from you. And instead, you know, these people really went above and beyond. And Sidney Harris decided that I was underselling myself. And so he said to me, you're capable of much more than you do. And I was doing just fine, but, you know, I wanted to play ball. I had a girlfriend at the time. I thought school was okay, but a little overrated, but I thought it was okay. And so Sidney Harris says to me, here's what I'm going to do. We're going to spend 2 days a week after school. I'm going to teach you Einstein's special theory of relativity. And if you get it, then I want you to go this summer to a National Science Foundation program. So I thought it was nuts. But that sequence of events, and I went up to Northfield Mount Herman, studied science, physics with a professor at Muhlenberg College, met a whole bunch of kids from places I'd never heard of, Andover, Exeter, Taft, and so forth. And I realized two things. First of all, that I didn't know how to dress. And second of all, because I was completely like in the wrong clothes. And second of all, that I could play in this league. Mm-hmm. That they had been to many more concerts at Tanglewood than I had been to, but that I could go to Tanglewood and hear music. And that had such a profound effect on me. And I always say this, that, you know, I just thank God every day that nobody in that school said, because I grew up in housing, public housing, that somehow they should have different expectations for me.
So, you wrote about Mr. Harris. Mr. Harris' expertise was in physics, but what he taught me went far beyond science. He pushed me. He shaped the way I thought about my future. I mean, so he had a profound influence. Were there other teachers who?
There were others. I mean, Carol Tain, who was my English teacher. There was, Sidney Seifer, who was my drama teacher. But this guy in particular is so. There are two people in my life I feel outside of the people I love, my family and so forth. But two people in my life changed the arc. One was Sidney Harris, and the other was Lewis Powell, who was the Supreme Court Justice that I
clerked for him. Yeah.
And those were the two people that made me see the world very differently. I mean, lots of people have influenced me. I've been blessed with wonderful mentors and friends and colleagues and so forth. But these two guys really were different.
So you went to Columbia on scholarship.
I went to Columbia on scholarship.
And then to Harvard Law School.
All right, so Columbia on scholarship because of Sidney Harris. Sidney Harris says to me, I was on my way to Queens, and I was fine. A lot of my friends were going to Queens College. I thought this was cool. And the one thing I hated was I have to continue to live at home, but I didn't have any choice. So Sidney Harris says, well, just apply to Columbia. I said, look, Mr. Harris, I said, I know we're playing this game and you keep winning, but at some point you're going to get this wrong, I said, because first of all, I'm not going to get into Columbia. I mean, I know what that requires, and it's not going to happen. And if I get in, I can't pay for it. He said, well, what the hell? We've played this game. Why not try one more shot? And what's the worst that happens? You say, you spend $100 or whatever back then, $50 on an application. You don't get in, you don't get in. You don't get a scholarship, you don't. So anyhow, I got in. I got this incredible scholarship. I mean, it's paid for. And the best part about it, the only condition of the scholarship was you had to live on campus. And so this is when I really started to believe there must be a God. Because, 4 more years I would have. So anyhow, then I went to Harvard Law School after that. I mean, then my whole life changed. I mean, going to Columbia was just entirely transformative.
So the journey now, here's the journey from a kid who really was transformed by public school teachers, particularly Mr. Harris, and into their antagonists. What happened? I mean, we know public schools and some teachers shaped your life. But then look at the role you're in now and how you're widely perceived. Have teachers changed? Have schools changed?
A little bit. Well, first of all, I categorically reject the notion that I am somehow opposite or opposed to teachers. I believe in my heart of hearts that the magic ingredient in education is teaching, and to me there's no greater heroes than teachers. Now, having said that, teachers operate in a system that I actually think is dysfunctional, and I challenge that system. They operate under rules that I don't think are effective, both bureaucratic and union-driven, and I challenge those things. And so, obviously, both people who were able to paint me in a way that I think doesn't really represent what I'm about, but also people who are threatened by the fact that, for example, I never thought seniority ought to be the be-all and end-all in education. That I thought that there were more important values. I believe deeply that excellence should be a driver. But I also think K-12 education has changed in lots of ways. It's become much more politicized than when I was there. And the second thing that's happened that transformed it is, people don't get this, but when I was in public schools in New York in 1950 and the early 60s, obviously it was before the whole women's movement had occurred. And then the best and brightest and the women were teachers often in the city. Now, 20 years after that, or 15 years after that, when all sorts of opportunity rightfully opened up, what you saw is lots of people who had previously been teachers are now in medicine and in law and in business and so forth. So I think what happened was we weren't drawing the same people into the system. And that became an issue for the country, and how you professionalize teaching and draw the best and brightest. And every time you hear about whether it's Finland or South Korea or Japan, they draw from really the top echelons of their graduates. And we need to do that in America.
Now, you reject the notion that you're somehow an antagonist. You're saying, well, it's the teaching force has changed, but it's a system that's rigid and seniority and so on and so forth. But you have pushed for a system which evaluates teachers based on student test scores. And let's go back to Mr. Harris. It seems to me that the contributions he made to you transcend any kind of standardized test.
Sure. I agree.
Should teachers be evaluated in some way based
Look, I've always said, first of all, when you say I push for, I actually think it's unfortunate the way the system's set up. You have to have one set of rules. I do think student performance and the teacher's impact on it matters. I don't have any doubt about that. That doesn't mean that there aren't lots of other important things. But the problem we have is, because we have this huge school system, whether it's here or in Boston or Chicago, and you need one rule for everything. In my business, I evaluate my people on my team the way I think it's appropriate. The person who's running another operation might have entirely different, but we need to have these uniform rules. And when I would propose early on that we give greater discretion to principals, which is what Dave Levin or some of his people would do, I was told, no, we can't give discretion to principals. So this became a kind of system that evolved. But I don't think there's anything wrong with taking into account teacher impact on student performance, but I don't think it's a be-all and end-all. Second of all, and I think it's very important, John, I think this falls to, because it's fair that you write books criticizing me, but it's also fair that I give a few speeches criticizing you. Because, no, it's not I want to know a meaningful way to evaluate teachers. That's the challenge to me, so that those that are good become the heroes and are rewarded, and those that aren't don't belong there. I've talked to lots of parents all over the city, and they tell me, I said, why did you get active in the PTA? And they say, well, because that's the way your kid gets good teachers. So people understand this, and the question for me is, what I worry most about, what I used to preach when I was chancellor, is the heroes in this system are those who give voice to the voiceless. Because the people who have champions, the parents who know how to navigate the system, their kids will do fine. They'll get the good teachers. But I'll go to any principal and they will tell you. I'll give you my favorite life-shaping experience when I was chancellor. Second year I was there, I called in 3 principals from Manhattan. And I said to them, what was the worst thing that Tweed, where I worked from, that we've done to you in the last year? And I just didn't expect. They said, well, you sent us excess teachers from another school. And I said, well, wait a second. Everybody knows I'm opposed to that, but under the union contract, I'm required to do that. And they said, don't be ridiculous, Chancellor. These were good middle-class schools in Manhattan. They said, don't be ridiculous. Every other chancellor knew you can't send those teachers to us. Our community wouldn't accept them. And I said, well, what should I do with them? And they said, well, you should send them someplace else. I said, it's not my problem, they said. I said, you're right, it's not your problem, you see, but it's Juan's problem. And just send them someplace where people have no choices and they're supposed to take them. So to me, the challenge is not to say, anybody can say any evaluation system is imperfect. They're all imperfect. The challenge to me is that people of goodwill should come together and say, what's a meaningful way so that every teacher who ends up teaching in our schools is one you'd want to teach your kids.
You say goodwill. Is there no goodwill?
Now it's a highly polarized debate, I think. And one that I'm perfectly willing to say there could be other and better ways, but it can't be like it used to be. that as long as you have a pulse, you stay in the system.
Okay, everybody stays, but everybody changes.
You know, some people have got to have meaningful accountability. When I practiced law, there was real accountability, right? If you're not good, at some point PBS is going to lose interest in you. They measure you. They watch they look at how many people watch your segments, right?
Sure.
I mean, so one could say, well, but for those who watch, you're such a deep human being and a profound person, and I believe that you may have other benefits. But PBS cares how many people are watching.
So you're saying teachers should be judged by student numbers, in part.
That can be part of it, or give me better ways. Okay. But don't tell me you can't evaluate people. That I don't buy.
And don't say that I said that either.
No,
Okay, let me ask, in your years, what are you proudest of? You've been out for a while. What are you proudest of?
So I think I'm proudest of a couple of things. I'm first of all proudest of the fact that from when I started to when I finished, 20% more kids graduated from high school. The number of kids who went to CUNY went from 16,000 to 25,000. More than half of those kids were African American and Latino, and I believe deeply that there's been enormous education discrimination against children of poverty, particularly racial minorities. I'm very proud of that. I'm very proud of the fact that there's much more choice in this city than there was.
Charter schools.
Not just charter schools.
Small schools.
There are many, many more. You did a segment on that. Many, many more public schools than there were. There's much more demand. If you go within a few blocks from here, when I started, there was far less demand. Now we have literally waiting lists and so forth. So those things that I'm probably most proud of in the system. I'm proud of the fact that we gave far greater authority to principals, and I think that really matters. And, there are probably other things that if I sat and thought about it, I'd come up.
You started with, I made a little list sort of with a hypothesis of what you'd list, and you got them. But you started
spending
with
too much time together.
You started with graduation and remediation, Joel, in 61% was a record high, but only 21% were judged to be college ready, according to state standards, and 3/4 of students who went to CUNY.
No, that's second number's not right. 3/4 of the kids who went to the 2-year college.
Yeah, to the 2-year.
Not to
went to the CUNY 2-year colleges.
This is what I love. I'm glad you asked me this question.
And let me finish because at Hostos, the president of that college said the graduates of city public high schools are falling so far behind in reading and math that her remediation program doubled on your watch. So
this is one comment from one person, but the numbers are the same. In other words, when I started, the number of people being remediated at the 2-year colleges was about 2 percentage points higher. Mm-hmm. That's a problem that the state created, which I acknowledged, which is that to get a diploma in New York is not adequate to be college ready, and that has to be changed. But I will say this. It was equally true in 2002 when they were graduating 44%, and I took it to 66%. So the standards were no different. So for people to say they weren't college ready as if they were college ready in 2002 is simply changing the goalposts.
But if you increased the graduation rate but didn't change the percentage of kids who needed remediation, what did you accomplish?
Oh, you accomplished a lot. I mean, first of all, the first thing you accomplish is you increase the graduation rate. The number of kids who don't need remediation also increases dramatically. If you have 20% more, and of the kids who end up in community colleges, you don't change the numbers. But if you have 20% more, you have 20% more of the kids in community colleges who don't need remediation. You have 20% more kids in 4-year colleges who never needed remediation. So that's a big change.
You have a larger number of kids needing remediation also. If 75%, if the end goes up, it's still 75%.
Sure, but those kids dropped out in the past. They never got out of high school. Isn't it better that they go to CUNY even if they need remediation? You can't keep changing the bar. Let's stop there. Isn't it better that those kids go to CUNY even if they need remediation than that they drop out of high school?
Well, I would argue no.
Okay,
only because I've done some reporting on community colleges. And the pattern in community colleges is, and these are for low-income kids with Pell Grants, and remediation is a revolving door community colleges have very little, almost no incentive to see that those kids succeed because there's a line outside. It's like having a restaurant at the Grand Canyon. There's always a crowd there, even if people are dying. And so I would argue that no, you don't.
So it's better to have kids drop out of high school.
No, not better to have.
That's a choice.
Why is that the choice?
Because I graduated 20% more kids.
Yeah.
The alternative would have been 20% fewer kids, and those kids would have dropped out of high school.
Do you see
those are the choices?
Do you see the problem with going into remediation?
If you're telling me the standards are too low, sure. I'm just telling you that by the same standards, apples graduated 20% more. And that's not an excuse to say that we should keep the standards low. But that is the apples-to-apples comparison. The point you're making is actually a more powerful point, and it shows how bad off we are in America today, because fewer than 75% of our kids graduate high school, and of those kids, a substantial number, maybe close to half, are not college ready. So we're kidding ourselves, and that I agree with. But you can't keep saying, which a lot of my critics have done, well, these kids are not college ready, when in fact they never were college ready, and I didn't set the requirements for graduation. Maybe the real numbers would have gone from 24% to 37% if they used college readiness, but that would have still been a significant increase in the number of kids whose lives improved. And even something as simple as a high school diploma was necessary to get a job as a firefighter in New York. So these things do matter.
So, but you presented as an alternative between giving a diploma, which may not mean very much, and dropping out. Why isn't there a third way, which would be to strengthen the high school curriculum? I was telling Joel backstage about a program in Texas where they have a lot of early college programs in the school and change the courses, get away from the drill, but try to make things more. Why wouldn't that be an alternative?
It's not about drill. You never heard me talk about drill. What I think is we even better educate kids. All I'm saying is whatever way we educate, we can get into what I think is a great education. I'm happy to talk about that. But I want to just stop here because I really think this is deceptive. The standard, let's just say the basket is 10 feet tall. And let's say I shoot foul shots and I make 7 out of 10, right? Then somebody else comes in and they shoot foul shots and they make 9 out of 10. They're a better foul shot shooter, right? Yeah. That's what I did. Now, what you're saying is, but the basket was 12 feet, you would make 4 out of 10. And that may be true. But I should be measured when I'm being compared against the basket that I inherited and how I moved people and the percentages in it. Now, we want to have another discussion. How do we change the overall outcomes for kids so that far more are college ready and college prepared? I have a lot of ideas on that. And many more kids were college ready and college prepared. Do you feel that on your watch you did your best to prepare those kids for a world in which the basket was in fact 12 feet away? Because that's the issue. No, it's part of it. I did the best you can. Most of these kids couldn't shoot with the basket 6 feet. So my job was to improve. No, I'm serious.
I understand.
My job was to improve it for everyone. Do I think that there so much more needs to be done? You're absolutely right.
I want to ask you about the academic report card for your chancellorship, because there was kind of a lot of headlines about the scores going up, and the mayor who had taken control of the schools. That was part of his re-election campaign more than once. But then the scores were recalibrated, and suddenly you were pretty much back to square one. Is that fair?
They were recalibrated. Again, I think it's fine to say that the standards were too low, but it's just a little maddening to me to say that when it used to be if you got 25 questions right, it's proficient. Now they say you need 32 questions. So you're just not comparing apples to apples. I don't think it's a fair way to do it.
Do you think the recalibration was unfair? Do you think that 65% or whatever it was, 80%? Do you think those numbers were accurate?
It wasn't that they were accurate. It's the state sets the benchmark. What I'm saying is unfair to say in year 5, a 25 gives you proficient. The next year, 35 is required. So therefore, fewer people are going to be proficient.
But actually, Joel, it's going the other way. The standards, at least on the Regents, have gotten easier, not harder. If you look at Regents tests,
now you're
over the
jumping.
years,
First of all, let's just stay.
but
you were talking about K to 8 scores, 3 to 8 scores,
Right.
not Regents.
Okay, but
And I'm telling you, they recalibrated to make it harder. I think they should have recalibrated to make it harder. I got no disagreement. But you can't compare.
But the question is, if you look at the numbers, in 2003, 52.5% of fourth graders were proficient in English. Today, it's 51%. In 2003, 32.6% of eighth graders were proficient. It's 35% today. So a slight increase in eighth grade math.
But it's a different measure of proficiency.
But what my question is, are schools better today than they were when you took over?
I don't think there's any question. First of all, take the national tests. Let's just deal with them for a second, right? So number one, in math and in English in the fourth grade, our kids have gone up a year. That's a year's worth of learning. Yeah. And in the eighth grade in math, they've gone up half a year. That's a half year's worth of learning. You're
talking about since 2003?
Since 2002 when we started.
Okay.
Right?
They went up 8 points in fourth grade math, 6 points in eighth grade math. And the gaps between white and black and Hispanic have narrowed on your watch.
Right.
Okay.
So
they have, however, from 2009 to 2011, they've gone down or been standing still.
They've been flat. They haven't gone down.
So, in fourth grade math, 237. In 2009, 234. In 2011, that's a decrease.
That's a decrease. So eighth grade English went up from
eighth grade English went up 2 points. 2
points.
Yeah.
Right. Well,
eighth grade math went down 1 point. Essentially they're flat. They're
right.
Just
That's what I said.
Yeah.
They were flat.
Yeah.
I don't. But.
Yeah.
But overall, on my watch, there's no question. From 2002 to 2011, they went up basically a year's worth of learning in fourth grade English and math and a half a year in eighth grade. Mm-hmm. The only place that they were flat during that time was eighth grade English, which does parallel a national problem. So if you look at all of those numbers, John, I'm not saying, I'm not saying this was a miracle. I'm not saying that there's not a lot more needs to be done. There's clear progress that happened in the city.
Well, in the city, in the state, New York State generally was disappointing. And New York City was a little bit below the state, although because it had started so low, it had gone up.
Our gains compared to the state were dramatic. Yeah. No question about that. We went up about 25 NAEP points at the same time the state was basically, the rest of the state, if you took New York out, went up about 2 NAEP points. That's a dramatic, and 10 NAEP points is about a year's worth.
10 years on NAEP is worth
10 points.
Yeah. No, 10 points, yeah. I want to change the subject and talk about special needs kids. And in fact, Joel, this is a very important issue here at the JCC. The JCC's has a Center for Special Needs. The mission statement reads, the mission of the Special Needs Department at JCC in Manhattan is to build and nurture an inclusive and accepting community wherein individuals with varying special needs can participate and succeed in innovative social, recreational, and educational activities. We seek to support and empower individuals with special needs, their families and caregivers, and provide them with access to cutting-edge speakers, programs, technologies. We understand and respect the diversity of our community as we work to meet the changing needs of individuals with disabilities in the 21st century. I read that because I want you to know that it's a core activity here, and also that some members were upset that you were invited. I totally reject that. I mean, they can be upset. I can't control that, but it's essentially my right to ask whomever I choose and to ask whatever questions. And I think those folks will calm down and understand that it's important to hear from you. That said, how do you evaluate your track record as chancellor in dealing with kids with special needs?
So again, I would say the following. I would say that we did some things that were good. The city continues to do some things that are good. There have been a lot of challenges with the population. If you look at their graduation rates, they too have gone up. Apples to apples. Don't change the sticks on me. If you do that, they have gone up. But I would tell you that there's huge gaps and issues with special needs kids, not just in New York, but throughout the country. And I wish we had done a lot more. It's not an easy group of children to find the right programs for. A lot of them, I think, are being put in segregated spaces, and I think that's not a good thing. And I think we've integrated more of those kids in much less time in isolated, self-contained classes. I still think there's a lot more to do there.
I did some digging into this and comparing the graduation rates in New York City on your watch with the state graduation rates. And I won't characterize it, just give you the numbers. In New York City, 24% of children with disabilities, students with disabilities, graduated after 5 years. It was 47% statewide, almost virtually twice the number. In terms of dropouts, in New York City on your watch, 22% of students with disabilities dropped out in 4 years, compared to 12% dropout rate statewide.
I'd be happy to respond. So if you did the research, I think a fairer set of statistics is what were those numbers in 2002 when I started? And I bet you the number of special needs kids graduating was much lower and the number dropping out was higher. So you can't just, people have got to put things in the right frame, John. And to compare me to the rest of the state where you have special needs kids in affluent communities that may be in very different circumstances, special needs kids, if you compare me to Buffalo or Rochester, I'd say that's a fairer comparison because they have the confounding factors of not just special needs, but poverty and all the other issues that we face here in the city. But I will assure you, and I don't have the numbers in my pocket, and I will assure you that the number of special needs kids graduating in 2010, 2011 was higher, substantially higher than the number graduating in 2002.
Before you start. Well, I don't have the numbers either, so I'm sorry I don't. But what your critics say, Joel, is that you put in place policies which in fact exacerbated the situation. You set up the small high schools, which we did a piece on the NewsHour, and remarkably successful in many ways, but there was an early exemption for those high schools. They did not, apparently, have to take kids who needed special needs classrooms. And I gather that was phased out, but that was arguably an act of discrimination. You established a lot of charter schools which they released their own self-assessment just a couple days ago, where they acknowledge that they have a significantly lower rate of acceptance of special needs kids. You established what are called collaborative teaching teams, and a lot of anecdotal evidence that those teams, classrooms were used as a kind of dumping ground rather than providing the kids with the attention they need. Now, and then the final thing is that you reorganized early on, and in the interest of efficiency, the 32 school districts and so on, you consolidated, but that eliminated 1,000 school-based education evaluator positions and all special ed advisors, and the result was documented a 35% drop in referrals, a 36% decline in evaluations. That was in 2005. And in 2008, the state controller found that the number of students waiting for evaluations more than doubled, and waiting more than 60 days, which is a violation of federal regulations, and it doubled from 29,000 to 65,000. So arguably, these efficiencies overlooked special needs kids.
So first, collaborative team teaching surprised me because families, advocates were big supporters of that, and it seems to me to be a pretty good model. One, you mix special ed children with general ed kids. You bring in a special ed teacher and a general ed teacher, and it was one of our big successes. When the evaluation period went up, that was wrong, and I admitted it. I'm not going to defend things that I think are not good, and I don't want to get in a long discussion with you about these school-based people, but that system was broken for sure. It was not a system that was working well. But you're right to say, and it's a fair point to say, that the evaluation times went up. They got extended, and we were rightly criticized for it, and it was my bad.
Okay. Has that been changed?
Mm-hmm.
You're saying when you were criticized, you reacted.
We reacted, and in the last couple of 3 years, that number has come down significantly.
I guess the question, one of the things you believe very strongly in is empowerment at the school level, with charter schools and so on. But what that charter self-assessment report reveals is that the charter schools were accepting fewer special needs kids. So the question, I guess, is in the name of empowerment, did you turn your back on holding, did you give folks a chance to play fast and loose with the rules and not hold them accountable?
I don't think so. I mean, I think this whole question of choice is a big issue, and I want to come back to what I think is important about this. We supported legislation, and it became part of the legislation in 2010 to increase the number of special needs children and English language learners in charter schools, and I think that was right. The Charter Center put out the data to show what the numbers are. Those numbers have been growing significantly, both in ELL and in special need. But, we don't have mandatory quotas of ELL or special needs children in any of the schools. So all of a sudden now, when parents who are in a particular school district, they send their kids to a school, whether it's here on the west side or whatever, nobody says, you nor anybody else says, well, you don't have the requisite number of special needs or English language learners, because we give parents lots of choices. And so it doesn't end up that everybody gets the exact same amount of each kind of group. More important to me is that most people I know insist on choice for their kids. And the kids in the highest poverty communities are told it's one school and they're done.
But if you give the individual school the power, and then you can see that statistically significant difference between the traditional schools and the charter schools in enrollment of special needs kids, isn't it your obligation as chancellor to go say, hey, wait a minute, that can't happen by chance. What's going on?
Oh, I did that, and I actually supported legislation to remedy it. I was affirmatively a part of legislation that said that the numbers have to be transparent and that they have to make sure they take equitable portions of special needs and ELL.
But even in your small high schools, there was, I think the small schools had 7.2% special needs kids versus 10.7.
That's no longer the case.
So
that's way no longer the case. There have been all sorts of studies on that.
So that's evened out.
That's evened out. And plus, there's been the best education study was done by MDRC, highly respected study, a double-blind study you almost never see in education. Whether it was special needs, general needs, ELL, in every category, the kids in the new small schools were significantly outperforming statistically.
I saw the study. I got the
It's a very powerful study. And whether it was special needs, general needs, whatever, and it wasn't compared to what the schools had shut down were. It was compared to kids who applied to that school and then ended up in another school. And on every category, they did better. And the numbers now are virtually comparable.
I actually would agree with Joel that many of those small high schools are triumphant. That I want to open it up for questions in a couple of minutes. I want one more question from me, then I will. Judging teachers, a bunch of hands went up as soon as I said over.
That's what they're here for.
Judging teachers. The notion now is value added. If Joel was my teacher, they test me at the beginning and then test me later and see how much I've changed and give him credit for the growth. The concept of value added. There's been a kerfuffle, more than a kerfuffle, about releasing the scores. Do you believe those scores should be made public?
Yeah, I do.
Why?
I think parents are entitled to know it.
You have enough faith in that instrument, those test scores?
For parents to be able to make a judgment? That's
the validity of the scores. I mean, many psychometricians say, they are just not good enough measures to support the kind of judgments you want to make.
I think that's up to parents to be able to make those judgments. I mean, I as a parent would like to know that. Many parents have told me they'd like to know it.
Well, you're saying it's up to parents, but do you have confidence in the measure is what I'm asking. In other words, you think I mean, if you have an odometer on a car and you aren't quite sure whether it's every mile it's registering a mile or 4 miles or a quarter mile, you would not have confidence in that odometer.
Right.
So I'm asking.
I have what I've said on this, which I've said before, is I think that if you look at small differences, they're meaningless. If you look at large differences, they can be significant.
Over time or over a year?
During a year, much more reliable over time, no question, but you have to start someplace. You can't start with 5 years and 10 years out. So what I took the position that these numbers were numbers, and I always said this, if you try to make fine comparisons, they won't work at all. If you try to make dramatically different comparisons, they can be meaningful. They get more meaningful over time.
So do you just need 1 year of my scores as a teacher, or 3 years, or 5? What?
The more, the better, John.
But where's the entry point?
Where's the one? Do you need 1 year of baseball players' batting average, or do you need 5 years? Each tells you some relevant information about performance, and that's all I've said.
I have a niece who was teaching in Orlando, and they were setting up a system to judge her according to her kids' scores, and she told me that by January she had an entirely new group of students, and that's not something like that would not be uncommon in urban areas like New York. How do you do that?
You should be able to accommodate for it. In other words, you should take into account only those kids who stay a certain length of time so that you have meaningful numbers.
And we only test now, let's say, in English language arts and math. How are you going to evaluate the art teacher? You're going to have a test for the art teacher?
They do. Actually, it's funny you talk about Orlando, because not far from Orlando, they actually do that now in Tampa.
So you're in favor of more testing?
They have a system where people the teachers seem to embrace it. I mean, it's an example. You maybe ought to go down there and check. I'm serious. Maybe do a little reporting, because they seem to have a system. I talked to the superintendent down there, and it seems to be very, very well received.
And you're saying, are you telling me that they have a standardized test for kids in art?
They have measures in art. And I'm not sufficiently familiar, but they have measures in art, and they do value add in art.
Are you in favor of that for the kids in New York City?
What I am in favor of.
I mean, our children in America are already the most tested kids in the world. I know you know that. So but are you saying we need more?
No, I'm saying what we need is ways to evaluate. I've been in art classes that were a joke, and I don't think we should tolerate it. So I say we have to have the following discussion. You're saying, which is fine with me, that value added is not the be-all and end-all. But how do we evaluate? Kids deserve good art teachers, right?
Yes.
How do you know whether teachers in the city of New York, whether X or Y is good at art? How would you, if you were the chancellor, how would you propose we decide that?
I would probably call in a whole lot of qualified people and figure out a way to make some judgments.
Give me some ideas.
Well, no, I don't have them here because I'm not the expert. Yeah.
But that's what my point is. In other words, normally...
But the idea that you would have a standardized test, which would probably be an inexpensive standardized test that would somehow judge the quality of an art teacher, strikes me as fundamentally absurd.
Well, again, I don't know what they do down there, so I don't want to defend it. Yeah. But I will tell you, what strikes me as absurd is we have no way to evaluate. We've been at this for 100 years now, and people telling me, we have no way to evaluate an art teacher.
Well,
you're a student of this field.
Oh.
And I assume if my kid were in art class and I realized that she spent all month drawing her hand, I would be upset about that,
yeah.
right?
And there's an evaluation.
I would like some method to fairly evaluate.
And you want a standardized method. You don't trust.
I'm happy to try. I was the one who proposed we ought to give much more discretion to principals. But the union took the position that would be unfair because they would play favorites and things like that. So that's
Are you happy with our approach to evaluating students right now?
Our approach to evaluating students?
Yeah.
I think it has to be much more rigorous. I think the tests need to be much, much more demanding. We need to be testing a lot of skills we're not fully testing. Having said that, in another unbelievably comprehensive study by people up at Harvard, Raj Chetty and those guys, they found that these test scores, even on New York tests that go back now 20 years, were a damn good predictor in terms of value add and student performance. It was really quite a remarkable study. I think it surprised a lot of people.
Yeah. I think the argument about the quality of the tests, whether they end up predicting income in that particular study, because we use the test scores to help kids get into college, doesn't follow that they were necessarily good tests.
No. They predicted much more than income. They predicted whether kids got pregnant out of wedlock. They predicted whether kids were on welfare. They predicted a lot of prison rates. They predicted a lot of things.
Right, and they may well, but we also know those test scores are highly correlated with income. I mean, there's a whole lot of flaws in that particular study.
No, but they studied value add, so whether you started very low, if you made gains, that showed up in additional dollars. So, I mean, it was a remarkable study. And, again, I didn't design it. I mean, these are people, Raj Chetty said when he went into it, he thought he was going to get a different result.
Do you think we test our kids too much?
No, I don't think we test our kids too much. When I was in public schools in New York, we were tested all the time. I don't get it. People are rebelling.
You had
against
teacher-made tests all the time.
So what? Yeah. So what?
No,
we had Regents
and those are
tests.
reliably the most reliable tests of all.
No, they're not the most reliable tests. They're not. One of the things that struck me is I used to look at when I was chancellor how different kids on different teacher-made and teacher-scored tests, how they would get very different results.
That's a fair point. They are
very
not necessarily the many are very reliable. It does depend.
But look, I don't want to suggest to you that I think how we evaluate students, similarly to how we evaluate teachers, we can do better jobs. I'm excited about the fact that there's 2 consortia now on the federal government with federal government support, looking at new, more rigorous tests that test much more rational analysis, much more higher order thinking, much more problem solving. But I do think we need to assess people.
No one's arguing that. One of my failures in my relationship with Joel is I've tried to convince him not to say rigorous, but to say challenging. Rigorous means harsh, unyielding, as in rigor mortis. But I can't seem to get.
I think it means demanding, but in any case, I'm glad to be educated.
I want to open it up for questions. Yeah. Now we have a microphone, and the mic will come to you. And would you tell us who you are, please, and ask your question?
Jeffrey Schwartz. Sorry about that. My question goes to unions. When I look at the landscape of America, once great industries like the auto industry or the steel industry were brought to their knees, unions were certainly part of the problem, not part of the solution.
What is your question?
My question is, can either of you two give me an explanation, John, I'm sure you have an opinion as well, as to why, with education as maybe the most important thing that we can do for our children, how can we afford to subject our children to continue to be in schools where there are union work rules that limit the ability for education in America to be competitive?
Yes, that question to you, I think. So I think, look, unions are going to have to be part of the solution overwhelmingly in most urban areas in America today. They're unionized school districts. While I disagree with Randy on certain things, I give her a lot of credit for the fact that I think she's trying to constructively engage. To me, I separate out pure and simple whether somebody's in a union, which I think is a collective bargaining right that they deserve, from a lot of these work rules, which I think are undermining K-12 education. And I think we need to move toward a much more professionalization of teaching, and I would hope to see that happen. But I at least expect, as far as the eye can see, that the public education system will be unionized. And that's, to me, a fact of life.
And I would only say that there's no correlation between the success of a school system and the strength or weakness of unions. I mean, there are strong unions in Massachusetts, which have some of the best schools. There are very weak unions, if they exist at all, in Louisiana and Mississippi. Yeah. Question over here, yes.
Hi, I'm Jill Apple, and my question is, I'm the mother of a 4-year-old, and we're starting the kindergarten drama that is New York City, and we live on West 60th Street, and I walk past PS 191 on my way to take him to private preschool, and my question is, I'm a product of public education. My husband's a product of public education. We believe in public education, but I just don't know what to do. My question is, like, will he be the guinea pig if I send him to a quote unquote failing school? Do I use my own child to better the school? at the risk of not giving him the best education he can possibly have?
So I'll give you my candid answer to that. I think I hope you can find the right public school for your child, but I would never guinea pig a child.
Question here, yes.
Hi, my name's Dana Goldstein. I'm wondering if you could talk to us more about what News Corp is working on in terms of education innovation. I think a lot of people are curious to know exactly what it is that's coming down the pike there.
When we're ready, we'll talk about it, but I'm not in a position now. We're working on some very interesting educational technology plays. We'll be totally transparent when we're ready, but we're not there yet. I'm sorry.
But may I say something that I think schools should be doing with technology? I think every middle school should have an air quality monitor. It costs about $20. And the kids, some group of kids in 8 o'clock in the morning, noon, 3 o'clock, go out, measure the air quality, should be connected by the internet with every other middle school in the city and analyze the data, write about it, look for anomalies. You could do the same thing with a water quality monitor, which costs about $200, but you can start creating knowledge. We have to have schools that help kids create knowledge. They can't be answer factories, not in an era when their information is around them 24/7. You know, we used to send kids to school because that's where the knowledge was kept. Ain't true anymore. We need a different kind of school, and I'm sure Joel was working on things that will help change that. Here's a question.
My name is Tom Allen. I visited a school yesterday in Brooklyn, the New Learning Academy, and Shimon Warniker, who I think was a protege of yours, started that school. And they have a master teaching program there where teachers mentor other teachers. First of all, I wanted to get your view on that, and even Mike Mulgrew seems to think that's a good idea. And the second part of my question is, in terms of teacher evaluations, how do you quantify the motivation that you received from the physics teacher in your high school?
So let's start with the second one. I don't think you can quantify that. That doesn't mean you can't evaluate it. And all I'm saying is let's engage in a process that it leads to meaningful evaluation. You can't quantify everything in life, and I get that, you know, and there's all those, not everything that counts can be counted, and not everything that's counted counts. So I get all of that. On the other hand, what I do know, and I suppose I don't think there's a person in this room would disagree with me, that having great teachers for kids really matters, and not everyone is a great teacher. And I think we have to have an honest discussion about that, Tom. And you know, I will just say, you are a champion of education reform, and I appreciate that. On the New American Academy, it gives you an example, though, of how stultifying education can be, because Shimon came to me, and he proposed this after he got his PhD at Harvard. He had been a great principal up in the Bronx. And what he has is 4 teachers, from a master teacher down to an apprentice teacher. They get differential pay, and they work together, and they get 60 kids for the 4 of them, start in kindergarten, and it goes through the 5th grade. So these teachers stay with them. Now, I happen to think it's a very interesting, exciting, break down the walls model. David Brooks wrote about it recently in the New York Times. More important to me, however, is that we need to innovate. And I can't guarantee you that that school is going to knock the leather off the ball. On the other hand, we should certainly be prepared to try models like that, models like the School of One, models like the iSchool. I'm so proud. Today I got asked to deliver a graduation speech at a school that started 4 years ago that really uses innovation and technology in a very profound way. So innovation, which drives every segment of the American experience, is somehow been missing in action. And the New American School is a paradigmatic example. The union did agree to it, and I think they're as excited about it, I hope so, as I am.
I would just say that I have a chapter in my book about teacher evaluation in Toledo, where the union is heavily involved in evaluating first and second year teachers, and it seems to work. That it's a complicated issue, but you have to have a way to evaluate. Sidney Harris, it doesn't just look at test scores. Someone has a mic. Yes.
Yes, my name is John Moreno. I'm the executive director of an organization that helps newcomer Latinos to go to college. And my question goes, and I'm really shocked that we didn't talk about parents. And I just want to know what it's your thoughts about the involvement of parents, immigrant parents, in the education of their kids, and how the major control play a major role of taking some parents out of that participation, which was the board.
I didn't get the last part of your question, taking parents out of...
So when we had major control, parents don't have a saying of what is happening. So how that affect the participation of immigrant parents who already have a barrier to participate in the school of their kids.
So I think parental involvement is very important. I don't think that necessarily that's inconsistent with Merrow control. We put a parent coordinator in every school, many of whom were indigenous from the community and would basically knew the people, spoke the languages, and so forth. But I will admit it's a very hard challenge to get more and more parents involved and active. I think there are two things that we can do. One is to give parents more choices. When parents have choices, I found this in Harlem, when parents had real choice, they got much, much more involved in their kids' schools, and I think that matters. And second of all, we need parents to get much, much more involved in their kids' lives. Kids who are spending all their waking hours on Facebook and all their time watching the television are not kids that are getting the education that they need. And somehow, and I'm not sure the most effective ways to do this, but what we need is parents who are much, much more committed to making sure their kids really value and get involved in education and get involved in their kids' schools.
I have if I may, I have a slightly different perspective after 35 years as a reporter. I think schools have been so arrogant about parents. And if I were in charge, I would say the kindergarten, first grade, that once a week there is some homework activity that engages the parent or guardian. So you say to the first grade teacher, first grade kids, go home tonight, ask your mom, your dad, your grandpa about the first movie they remember seeing and come tell the class about it. And every week you do that, all the way up through sixth grade, writing. Go interview your mom about the first trip she took on a bus. Go talk to your dad about favorite meal and write something. The parent's going to want to read what you wrote. The parent's going to want to read what the teacher wrote about what the kid wrote. And you're going to make it in the very, very fabric of the curriculum. And then the second thing I do is I give every teacher a business card. He's got a business card, I've got a business card, and teachers need that dignity. How many times with my three kids, one of them's here tonight, you go to the faculty meeting or the parent-teacher conference, and I say, I'm John Merrow. I'd say, I'm Mrs. McGinnis. Well, if you had a business card, she'd say, I'm Rosa McGinnis. We need to elevate teachers, but at the same time, we need to remind them that the parents are the primary educators, and their job is to pull them in. And I don't think it's brain surgery to do it. Yeah, please.
You've spoken a lot about
Would you tell us who you are, please?
Sorry, I'm Miriam Lipsius. You've spoken a lot about the measures you have in place to see how public schools are doing, but what I wonder is about private schools, and specifically religious private schools in Brooklyn, in New York City, that, I mean, to my awareness, there are private schools that hardly educate their students, and students graduate hardly literate. They never had a science class in their life, never a social studies class either. They have, basic English up until the age of 13, and then that's cut off also. So I'm wondering, are there any measures of oversight in place for private schools in New York City?
There should be. There's certainly metrics that apply to them, and they publish their scores on the math and the reading tests and so forth. But I think all schools that are accredited schools by a state should be subject to the kind of review to make sure that they meet basic standards, and I wouldn't exempt anyone.
Did you, as chancellor, do things to try to strengthen, say, the parochial school system, which is struggling? And if those schools closed down, you would have a flood of kids?
I mean, I did. I met with the people who were the superintendents. We talked about ways to strengthen them. We had lots of meetings about this, but it's not something that was front and center in my agenda because I had to worry about the 1.1 million kids in the public schools.
But of course, if they closed, you'd have 1.3 million.
but that's a real part of the problem is the finances of those schools are complicated and made more difficult. Many of them are now undersubscribed and going through the real problems. I mean, other than to support public funding for them, which has its own issues of vouchers and all of that, I'm not sure exactly what the solution is.
I don't know. Yeah, no, it's a very complicated issue, but yes, for your question, yes, please.
My name is Maria Rabinovich, and I'm a parent of 2 children in public schools. And I wanted to ask you regarding the needs of students in the schools. You've mentioned a little bit about the needs of children with special needs. What about the children who want to be challenged, who want to perform, who want to be academically challenged? I mean, there are programs like Gifted and Talented that have been cut pretty severely in the city. And if you took the exam, I think the statistics this year are that there are about 3,000 students who have gotten a 99th percentile for 400 spots. What happens? What happens to these children who don't get into the citywide or programs or to the into their top choices for the G&T programs? I mean, there's a loss of there's a potential loss of interest of challenge in the academics. How does the Board of Education deal with that?
So I think we try to expand, and I expanded Anderson. I expanded several of the other schools. It's I think I agree with you. I think kids that need to be challenged. I'm not sure they have to be in a gifted and talented school. I think we have some schools here on the west side, for example, that are not gifted and talented, that are challenging kids. I think the question of basically how many specialized schools we have is a very complicated policy question, because it goes to all the issues that John's talking about if some schools are totally homogeneous and then other schools become more homogeneous in the other way, and how you create a system like that does both is a challenge. But I will say, at least, and I took a fair amount of heat on this, I'm a believer in gifted and talented education, and I think the city should continue to expand those opportunities. We grew the number of specialized high schools on my watch. When I started, there were basically 3 specialized high schools. Now there are probably 10 in the city.
Joe, there's plenty of evidence that during the era of No Child Left Behind, which essentially began a little bit before you became chancellor, there was such an emphasis on getting kids over the bubble, over that last hurdle, that there was a decline in attention within regular schools to gifted kids. Do you think that did that happen in your?
I don't know that it happened nationally. I mean, I know in New York we try to push gifted and talented, but I agree with you that there has been not sufficient focus on creating opportunities for kids who are really trying to push it in the other direction.
And since giftedness is randomly distributed, the kids who picked smart parents, rich parents, they're going to get the stimulating stuff in the summer. But the kids who didn't pick rich parents, they were getting it in school. And Bill Sanders, who's a well-known statistician, said that those kids, those talented kids from low-income families, without the stimulation, are regressing toward the mean. So it's a real tragedy. But we have time for one last question. Then you can come up and ask more questions while we're drinking wine. Who has the mic? Okay, you have the mic. Make a quick question. You're
Hi,
keeping us from our wine.
My name is Tira Gray. I had a question.
Oh, wait a sec. Tira Gray, producer, NewsHour, big fan.
All right.
It's going to be a friendly question.
She produced 2 pieces for the NewsHour. Very talented producer. No longer works for the NewsHour. I lost her, unfortunately.
So this goes back to the pieces we covered and starting out. I think part of the problem with so much public education and Department of Education's inherit is this constant triage of problems. And so it stymies innovation when innovation is so much the key to solving so many of the problems. When you came into office as chancellor, how many years were you in a triage mode, and at what point do you feel that you were able to move on that and start innovating, or did you?
I felt like the first 2 years, 2.5 years were the triage years, and then I felt like sort of as we moved into the mayor's second term, we began to do the innovation and the change. That doesn't mean we didn't do any in the early years, but I do think it's a perfect point to end on, is the whole model is built on rules. It's all at every level of the system, whether it's the bureaucratic rules, whether it's the contract rules, whether it's the legal rules. And those systems, what reminded me was it felt like Gulliver being tied down by the Lilliputians. Your degrees of freedom were as close to zero as possible. Unless and until we create a system in which there is realistic accountability and that people come together and agree on it, And second of all, we don't try to micromanage every single aspect of the whole enterprise. When I started, another one of those aha moments was I met with the head of the Association for Elementary School Principals. And what was their big pitch to me? They wanted me, at that point, you needed 300 kids in a school to get an assistant principal. And they wanted me to lower the number to 275. And I said to them, how do I know whether you need an assistant principal or a left fielder? I mean, I can't figure out for every school. Why don't you take your budget and figure out what it is that you need? Some schools may need a guidance counselor. Some schools may need a psychologist. Some schools rather spend that money on an after-school program for the arts or a Saturday academy for English language learners. And why should some fuzzy bureaucrat like me in tweed decide this for the whole 1,600 schools? And you know what? People looked at you like nuts because they grew up in this world where they want a rule. Same thing with class size. Everybody wants a fixed class size. But maybe it would be a little better if you had one more kid in the class or two more kids and a Saturday academy for English language learners where they could bring the parents, because maybe the parents can come on a Saturday and not during the week. And surely we can devise a system that has meaningful accountability and much, much more discretion and freedom.
You say surely we can. They've done it in New Orleans, but it took Katrina and flooding to destroy the system. Do we need some equivalent? Do we need something like that to get us to a place?
I hope not.
I hope not, too.
That's a too high a price. Yeah. What I do hope is we can learn from the experience of what's going on in New Orleans, where they're getting significant results. And not a perfect system by any means, but significant results. But all of our instincts are not to micromanage people, and yet K-12 micromanages virtually everything.
Thank you very much. I want to thank Joel for doing this tonight. Journalists don't have any friends, but if I were allowed to have a friend, I'd want Joel to be my friend. But come on, we're going to pull back this curtain. There'll be some wine. Come ask the questions you didn't ask. Thank you very much. You've been a great audience.